If I had to describe how I felt about Madison when I first met her, I'd say she was like a dream wrapped in sunlight. She was 27, effortlessly stunning, and had this magnetic energy that pulled everyone in. I met her at a mutual friend's housewarming party, and from the second she walked into the room, it was like the air shifted. Madison had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. She laughed at my jokes, even the terrible ones, asked me questions about my career like she genuinely cared, and touched my arm just enough to make my brain short-circuit. I was 38 at the time, and while I had dated plenty of women before her, Madison made me feel like I'd hit the jackpot. We started dating a few weeks later. Madison was full of surprises. She'd take me to new restaurants, suggest weekend getaways, and introduce me to her wide circle of friends. Honestly, she made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. She didn't just love life, she devoured it. I'd never been the flashy type, but Madison brought out a side of me that wanted to spoil her. I bought her flowers every week, planned elaborate date nights, and didn't think twice when she mentioned wanting to take a break from her stressful marketing job to explore her passions. I made enough money to support both of us comfortably, so I encouraged her to follow her dreams. 6 months in, I proposed. Some of my friends thought I was moving too fast, but when you know, right? She cried when I popped the question, saying I was the most incredible man she'd ever met. We had a small, glamorous wedding, and for the first year, life felt like a fairy tale. Madison quickly adapted to her new role as my wife. She started volunteering at local charities, hosted dinner parties, and even talked about starting her own fashion line. It was easy to justify her shopping sprees as research for her future business, and I didn't mind footing the bill. After all, she made me feel like the luckiest man alive. But looking back, there were signs I should have paid more attention to. Madison was always on her phone, claiming she was networking or keeping up with her friends. She'd sometimes disappear for hours on errands that didn't seem to produce anything tangible. And while she always reassured me that we were a team, there were moments when her affection felt transactional, like she was ticking off a box rather than genuinely connecting with me. Still, I brushed off my doubts. I loved her, and I wanted to believe she loved me too. That first year, everything felt too good to be true. It turns out it was. By the end of our first year of marriage, cracks started to form in the perfect picture I had painted in my head. It started small. Madison would bring up new opportunities she wanted to pursue. At first, they seemed reasonable. She mentioned wanting to launch a boutique clothing line, which made sense given her love of fashion. "I just need a little startup capital to get things off the ground," she said one evening over dinner. "We could make this a family business. Think of the legacy we could build together." I didn't even hesitate. Of course, I wanted to support her dreams. I transferred $50,000 into her account the next day. A few weeks later, she came to me with another idea. This time, it was investing in a friend's beauty startup. She promised it was a sure thing, and that we'd see a massive return. Again, I didn't think twice. Madison was smart, and I trusted her judgment. That was another $25,000. But the requests didn't stop. Over the next few months, she asked for money to hire designers, consultants, and PR firms. Then there were the business trips to New York, Los Angeles, and even Paris, where she claimed to be building her brand and making connections. I'd ask her how things were going, but her answers were always vague. "It's coming together, babe. These things take time," she'd say, flashing me that dazzling smile. The problem was, there was never any progress to show for it. No website, no product samples, no updates. Every time I pressed her, she'd get defensive. "Do you not believe in me?" she snapped one evening when I questioned why her supposed fashion line still didn't have a launch date. "You said you'd support me, and now you're acting like I'm some scam artist or something." Her reaction caught me off guard. I'd always prided myself on being a supportive husband, but suddenly I felt like the bad guy. I apologized and let it go, convincing myself that maybe I was being too impatient. Then came the credit card bills. Madison had always had expensive taste, but I assumed her shopping habits were within reason. After all, she was using the card I'd given her for her business expenses. But when I opened the statement one morning and saw a $12,000 charge for a private shopping experience at a luxury boutique, my heart sank. Madison, I said that night, holding the bill in my hand. What's this? She glanced at it and waved me off. Oh, that was for some samples I needed. You can write it off on taxes or something. Samples? For what? There's nothing tangible coming from this business, Madison. I've given you almost $200,000, and I still don't know what you're actually doing with it. Her face hardened. Are you seriously accusing me of wasting your money? Do you have any idea how hard I've been working to make this dream a reality? Not everything happens overnight, John. I hated arguing with her. She had this way of making me feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't being a good husband because I dared to ask questions. So, like a fool, I let it slide. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. As the months went on, Madison's spending only increased. She started leasing a brand new Range Rover, claiming she needed it to maintain a professional image. She booked spa days and personal trainers, saying it was all part of her brand development. And while she still talked about her business plans, it became clear that her passion for them was more about appearances than actual work. Meanwhile, our relationship began to suffer. Madison was always busy, always out with clients or investors. We stopped spending time together like we used to. She'd come home late, smelling faintly of expensive perfume that wasn't hers, brushing off my questions with excuses about long meetings or last-minute networking events. Intimacy faded too. She was distant, cold even, and when I tried to talk about it, she'd blame it on stress. You have no idea how much pressure I'm under, John, she'd say, rolling her eyes as if I was some clueless husband who couldn't understand her world. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was this ambitious, hard-working woman who just needed a little more time to prove herself. But the truth was starting to become impossible to ignore. There was a moment, one random Tuesday evening, that really stuck with me. I came home early from work and found Madison sitting on the couch, laughing into her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her expression immediately shifting to something guarded. Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Oh, just a friend, she said, locking her phone and setting it down. What friend? Why do you always have to interrogate me? She snapped, getting up and walking past me toward the kitchen. Can't I have a conversation without you breathing down my neck? Her defensiveness sent a chill through me. It wasn't the first time she'd reacted this way, but it was the first time I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something big. For the first time in our marriage, I started to wonder if I really knew the woman I had married. By the second year of our marriage, the passion that had once defined our relationship felt like a distant memory. Madison had become a stranger in our own home, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her to something or someone I couldn't see. The first thing I noticed was how distant she had become. She used to greet me at the door with a kiss, her face lighting up when she saw me. Now, she barely glanced up from her phone when I walked in. When I tried to initiate conversations, she'd either give one-word answers or mumble something about being too tired. The nights were the worst. We had always had a great sex life, playful, spontaneous, and full of energy. But now, she'd push me away, claiming she wasn't in the mood or that she was too stressed about her business ventures. I stopped trying after a while, too tired of the rejection to even bother. One night, I brought it up while we were lying in bed. She was scrolling through her phone, the glow of the screen highlighting her face, while I stared at the ceiling, feeling the growing void between us. Madison, is everything okay between us? I asked, my voice hesitant. She didn't look up. What do you mean? I mean, we barely talk anymore. We don't spend time together. I feel like you're slipping away from me. She sighed dramatically, setting her phone down on the nightstand. John, not everything is about you, okay? I'm under a lot of pressure right now, and the last thing I need is you guilt-tripping me. I'm not trying to guilt-trip you, I said, sitting up. I just miss you. I miss us. Her eyes softened for a moment, and for a second, I thought she might open up. But then her expression hardened again. You don't understand what it's like to have so much riding on you. I'm doing all of this for us, John, for our future. But instead of supporting me, you're just making me feel like a failure. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was I being unsupportive? Was I the problem? I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I just want to help. Well, if you really want to help, then stop questioning everything I do, she snapped before turning off the light and rolling over, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Her phone had become an extension of her hand. She was glued to it constantly, texting, laughing at messages, or scrolling through social media. Whenever I walked into the room, she'd quickly lock the screen or turn it face down, claiming she was just checking emails. It wasn't just the phone. She'd started dressing differently, sexier, more polished, like she was always headed to an upscale event. Tight dresses, high heels, perfectly styled hair, and expensive jewelry. She said it was to make a good impression on potential clients, but I couldn't help but feel like she was dressing for someone else. I tried to shake off the doubt. Maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, she had always been confident and outgoing. Maybe I was just projecting my own insecurities onto her. But then there were the absences. Madison was constantly out, late-night business dinners, weekend conferences, or impromptu trips to network. She'd come home smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't mine, brushing off my questions with vague excuses. One Friday night, she told me she was meeting a client for drinks. I asked if she wanted me to come along, thinking it might be nice to show my support. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "John, it's not a date. You'd just be bored out of your mind. Besides, I need to focus." I watched her walk out the door, my chest tightening with a mix of suspicion and helplessness. The turning point came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was cleaning up the kitchen when Madison's phone buzzed on the counter. She had gone upstairs to take a shower, leaving her phone unattended, a rare occurrence. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't resist. I glanced at the screen and saw a notification from someone saved as Carter. The message read, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again soon." My stomach dropped. My hands started to shake as I stared at the message, the words burning into my brain. I unlocked the phone. Her passcode was her birthday, a detail I knew by heart. What I found confirmed every fear I'd been suppressing. Madison wasn't just texting Carter. She was texting multiple men. There were messages about expensive gifts, secret meetups at luxury hotels, and intimate photos that made me feel physically ill. This wasn't networking. This wasn't business. This was something else entirely. When she came downstairs a few minutes later, wrapped in a towel, she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me holding her phone. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded, her face a mix of shock and anger. I didn't say anything. I just held up the phone, showing her the messages from Carter. Her face turned pale, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening. "You went through my phone? That's such an invasion of privacy, John. Who the fuck is Carter?" I said, my voice shaking. "He's a business associate," she snapped, snatching the phone out of my hand. "God, you're so insecure. This is exactly why I don't tell you anything. You always overreact." "Don't lie to me, Madison. I saw the messages. Last night was incredible. What business meeting ends with that?" She glared at me, her jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about. He's just being friendly. You're blowing this way out of proportion." My mind was spinning. Was she really trying to gaslight me right now? I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand the truth, but all I could do was stand there, my chest heaving with anger and hurt. "This is what you've been doing," I said quietly. "While I've been working to support you, you've been—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence," she interrupted, her voice cold. "I don't have to explain myself to you." She stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, clutching the edge of the counter to keep myself from collapsing. For the first time in our marriage, I realized Madison wasn't just hiding something. She was living an entirely different life, one I was never meant to be a part of. After the confrontation with Madison about the messages, things in our house felt colder than ever. She doubled down on her story, claiming Carter was just a persistent client who didn't understand boundaries. She even had the audacity to blame me, saying my insecure and controlling behavior was making her life harder. But the damage was done. No matter how much she deflected, the messages I saw haunted me. Carter wasn't the only one, and her flirty text with other men left no room for misinterpretation. I started paying closer attention, watching for the little signs I'd ignored before. It didn't take long for me to find my first undeniable clue. A week after the fight, Madison told me she had a business trip to Los Angeles. "It's just for the weekend," she said as she tossed a silk blouse into her suitcase. "I'll be meeting with a big investor who could help take things to the next level." "What's the investor's name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's not just one person. It's a group thing, more of a networking event." Her answer didn't sit right with me, but I didn't push. I'd already seen what pushing got me: more lies and more fights. Instead, I decided to keep quiet and do my own digging. The morning she left, I waited until she was out the door and called the airline. I knew her flight number because she had carelessly left her itinerary on the kitchen counter. I pretended to be her assistant, asking to confirm the flight details. That's when I found out there was no return flight. My heart pounded as I hung up the phone. Why would she book a one-way ticket if she was only going for the weekend? I paced the living room, trying to piece together what this could mean. Maybe she was planning to extend her stay. Maybe it was an oversight. Or maybe it was exactly what my gut had been screaming all along. She wasn't on a business trip at all. Fueled by suspicion, I logged into our shared bank account. Madison had her own accounts for her business expenses, but we also had a joint account that she used for everyday purchases. What I found made my stomach churn. In the past week alone, there were charges for a 5-star hotel in Beverly Hills, a high-end jewelry boutique, and an upscale restaurant that I knew she'd never go to alone. But the real kicker was a $3,000 charge to a private jet charter company. Private jet? Since when was Madison flying private? And why would she use our joint account for something so extravagant? I scrolled further and found even more questionable transactions: luxury spa treatments, designer handbags, and charges at bars and lounges that didn't fit the networking narrative she kept pushing. It was becoming painfully clear that Madison wasn't just lying to me. She was actively leading a life I knew nothing about. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of our relationship in my head. All the times she'd been late, all the nights she claimed to be working, all the unexplained expenses. It was like a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving until now. The next morning, I made a decision. If Madison wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I started by going through her closet. It felt invasive, wrong even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. In the back of her closet, buried under a pile of scarves, was a small leather-bound journal. It wasn't what I expected. I thought it might be full of notes about her business or scribbled ideas for her supposed fashion line. Instead, it was a meticulously detailed log of dates, names, and payments. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Each entry listed a man's name, the date they met, and the amount of money he had given her. Some entries included details about gifts, jewelry, cars, vacations, and notes about how to keep them happy. This wasn't just casual flirting. Madison was a sugar baby. I sat down at the kitchen table, the journal in front of me, and tried to process what I was seeing. Page after page, there was proof that Madison was being paid to entertain wealthy men. Some of the names I recognized: local businessmen, politicians, even one of my former colleagues. Others were strangers, but their bank account balances were clearly substantial. The worst part was that this didn't look like a recent development. Based on the dates in the journal, Madison had been doing this for years, long before we even met. My heart felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. How could I have been so blind? How could I have married someone who had been lying to me from the start? I wanted to scream, to punch something, to confront her immediately. But Madison wasn't home, and I needed more than just the journal. I needed undeniable proof that couldn't be explained away. The next day, I called a private investigator. I had never imagined I'd be the kind of man who would hire one, but at this point, I didn't know what else to do. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The PI, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, listened patiently as I explained the situation. "This isn't uncommon," she said when I finished. "People like your wife are very good at covering their tracks. But if she's leading a double life, we'll find out." She promised to look into Madison's travel history, financial records, and recent activities. In the meantime, she advised me to act normal, to avoid tipping Madison off while the investigation was underway. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every time Madison called or texted me from her so-called business trip, I had to force myself to act like nothing was wrong. "Miss you, babe," she said in one text, accompanied by a selfie of her lounging by a pool with a cocktail in hand. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling, but I typed back, "Miss you too. Can't wait to see you." It felt like lying, but in reality, I was just waiting for the moment I could finally confront her with the truth. And when that moment came, there would be no excuses, no lies, and no way out for Madison. The private investigator didn't take long to deliver results. Karen was efficient and thorough, and what she uncovered confirmed every fear I had about Madison, and more. 3 days after Madison's supposed business trip, Karen called me into her office. "You might want to sit down for this," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were photos, financial records, and detailed reports that painted a picture I could barely wrap my head around. Madison wasn't just entertaining one or two wealthy men. She had an entire network of them. The photos hit me first. There was Madison, dressed in designer gowns, sipping champagne on yachts, and leaning into men who looked old enough to be her father, or in some cases, her grandfather. One photo showed her kissing a man on the cheek as he handed her a diamond necklace. Another captured her walking arm in arm with a gray-haired executive into the lobby of a 5-star hotel. "She's been meeting these men at private events, charity galas, and exclusive clubs," Karen explained. "It's all very discreet, but the pattern is clear. She's been operating as a sugar baby for years." I flipped through the stack of documents, my stomach churning with every page. Karen had traced payments from multiple men to Madison's personal accounts. Tens of thousands of dollars every month, sometimes more, all labeled as gifts or consulting fees. "Most of the men are high-profile," Karen continued. "CEOs, politicians, trust fund heirs. They pay for her travel, shopping sprees, even rent for a luxury apartment in the city." I looked up, confused. "Apartment? She doesn't have an apartment. She lives with me." Karen hesitated. "She does have one. It's under her maiden name. She's been using it for meetups with these men." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Madison had an entire life I knew nothing about. A secret apartment, secret relationships, secret money. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a full-blown double life. The financial records were even worse. Karen had uncovered that Madison had drained nearly $300,000 from our joint account over the past 2 years. Much of it had gone to fund her extravagant lifestyle, designer clothes, luxury cars, spa retreats, but some had been funneled into offshore accounts under fake business names. "She's been preparing for an exit," Karen said bluntly. "If things ever fell apart with you, she'd have enough to walk away without losing anything." I sat there, staring at the pile of evidence, feeling like my entire world had been shattered. The woman I thought I loved, the woman I had married, wasn't who I thought she was. "She's good," Karen said, breaking the silence. "I've seen cases like this before, but your wife? She's on another level. She's smart, strategic. She knows exactly how to manipulate people." I clenched my fists, rage bubbling beneath the surface. I trusted her. I gave her everything. Karen nodded sympathetically. "I know, but now you have a choice. What do you want to do next?" When Madison came home from her trip, I was waiting for her. She waltzed through the door like nothing was wrong, wearing a designer dress and carrying a shopping bag from Louis Vuitton. "Hey, babe," she said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head, and her lips brushed my cheek instead. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone wary. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold. Madison frowned, setting down her bag. "About what?" I walked over to the table, where I had laid out the evidence Karen had gathered. Photos, bank statements, and copies of emails, all neatly organized in a damning display. Her eyes widened when she saw it. "What the hell is this?" "You tell me," I said, crossing my arms. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like proof that my wife has been lying to me since the day we met." Madison's face flushed, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening. "You hired a PI? Are you serious? That's such an invasion of privacy, John." "Privacy?" I snapped. You want to talk about privacy? What about the fact that you've been lying to me, stealing from me, and sleeping with other men? Do you even know what the word marriage means? She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. Don't bother lying, I said, my voice rising. I have proof, Madison. I know about the apartment. I know about the payments. I know about Carter and all the others. So don't even try to spin this. For a moment, she looked like she might break down. Her eyes filled with tears, and she started to say something, but then she stopped. Instead, she squared her shoulders and said, "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing other men, but it's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. It's exactly what I think. You're a sugar baby, Madison. You're not building a business. You're selling yourself to the highest bidder. Her face twisted in anger. You think I wanted this? Do you have any idea how hard it is to keep up with you and your expectations? You wanted the perfect wife, the perfect life, and I gave it to you. Do you think that came for free? You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. You're blaming me for this? For your lies? For your cheating? I did what I had to do, she said coldly. You're not exactly a saint, John. Don't act like you're innocent in all this. Her words were like a slap to the face. I had expected denial, excuses, maybe even an apology. But this was something else entirely. After she stormed out, I sat alone in the house we had built together, surrounded by the debris of our relationship. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the realization that the woman I thought I loved had never really existed. Madison wasn't just unfaithful. She was a liar, a manipulator, a stranger wearing the mask of the perfect wife. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let her continue to control my life. I called Karen the next day. What do I need to do to protect myself? I asked. First, freeze your accounts, she said. Second, talk to a lawyer. And third, don't let her talk her way out of this. It was time to take back control. Madison might have built her web of lies, but I wasn't going to stay trapped in it any longer. By the time I filed for divorce, I had reached my limit. Madison's lies had consumed me, turned me into someone I didn't even recognize, a paranoid, bitter version of myself. I couldn't let her drag me down any further. I followed Karen's advice to the letter. I froze our joint accounts, hired a top divorce lawyer, and started compiling every piece of evidence I had against her. The journal, the photos, the financial records. It all went into a meticulously organized binder that would make any courtroom drama look tame. But I wasn't prepared for how Madison would react when she found out. It started with silence. For the first few days after she was served the divorce papers, Madison didn't say a word. She avoided me entirely, locking herself in the guest room or leaving the house for hours at a time. I thought maybe she'd realized the game was up, that she was retreating to lick her wounds. I was wrong. On the fourth day, she came storming into the living room, clutching the divorce papers like they were a personal insult. "What the fuck is this, John?" she screamed, throwing the papers onto the coffee table. I didn't even flinch. "What does it look like?" "It's over, Madison." "Over," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You're seriously going to throw away our marriage over a few mistakes? Over this?" She gestured wildly to the stack of evidence I'd left out in plain sight. "You call lying, cheating, and stealing a few mistakes?" I shot back, standing up to face her. "Madison, you've been living a double life. You think I'm just going to pretend none of this happened?" Her face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, please, don't act like you're some kind of victim. You knew exactly who I was when you married me. You wanted a trophy wife, John. Well, guess what? Trophies don't come cheap." Her words hit me like a slap. Was she seriously trying to blame this on me? "I wanted a partner," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Someone I could trust, someone who loved me for who I am, not for my bank account. But you've been playing me from the start." Madison laughed bitterly. "You're so naive. Do you know how many women would kill to have what we had? But no, that wasn't good enough for you. You had to go digging, spying on me like some kind of paranoid creep, because you were lying to me." I shouted, my voice finally breaking. "You weren't just lying, Madison. You were using me. And the worst part? You don't even seem to care." She didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "Fine. You want the truth? I did what I had to do to survive. You think I wanted this life? You think I wanted to depend on you? Men like you act like you're doing us a favor, but all you really want is control." Her words were venomous, but underneath them, I saw something else: fear. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles and emotional warfare. Madison fought the divorce every step of the way, claiming she was entitled to half of everything, despite the evidence of her infidelity and financial misconduct. "She's trying to bleed you dry," my lawyer, Mark, warned me. "But with the evidence we have, she doesn't stand a chance in court." Still, Madison wasn't going down without a fight. She started spreading rumors about me to our mutual friends, painting herself as the victim of an abusive and controlling husband. She even tried to claim that I had forced her to become a sugar baby to maintain the lifestyle I demanded. It was absurd, but the whispers still stung. People I thought were my friends started distancing themselves, unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, Madison's antics escalated. She showed up unannounced at my office one day, causing a scene in the lobby. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she hissed, her voice low but furious. "You think you can just erase me from your life like I don't exist?" "Madison, you need to leave," I said through gritted teeth, glancing nervously at the wide-eyed receptionist. "Make me," she spat, stepping closer. "You want to destroy me, John? Fine, but don't think I'm going down alone." Security had to escort her out, but her words stuck with me. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I came home from work to find Madison sitting in the living room, a half-empty bottle of wine on the table in front of her. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my heart sinking. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, her face a mix of anger and desperation. "I wanted to talk," she slurred. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, stepping around her toward the stairs. "Don't walk away from me," she shouted, stumbling to her feet. "You think you're better than me, John? You're not. You're just as fucked up as I am." I stopped in my tracks, turning to face her. "Madison, I'm done. You need to leave." Her face twisted with rage. "You think this is over? You don't get to decide when it's over. I'll make you regret this, John. I'll ruin you." Her words chilled me to the bone, but I refused to let her see how much they affected me. "Do whatever you need to do," I said quietly, "but this marriage is finished." The next morning, I changed the locks and had a restraining order filed against her. It felt like a drastic step, but Madison had made it clear that she wasn't going to go quietly. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. Madison had built her life on lies, but I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. After Madison was officially removed from the house, the silence was deafening. For the first time in 2 years, I had space to think, really think, about what had happened. But that space also brought pain. Every corner of the house was a reminder of the life we were supposed to build together, a life that had turned out to be nothing but a carefully constructed illusion. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by memories. Madison laughing at my jokes, kissing me at the door, whispering sweet nothings in my ear. At the time, I thought those moments were real, but now I couldn't stop questioning. Was any of it real? Did she ever love me? Or was I just a stepping stone to her next payday? The hardest part was coming to terms with how blind I'd been. Looking back, the signs were so obvious. The constant secrecy, the unexplained expenses, the way she always deflected my questions or made me feel like the bad guy for asking them. It was all there, but I had chosen to ignore it. Why? Because I wanted to believe in her. I wanted to believe that I was the lucky man who had found the perfect wife. The truth was brutal. I had fallen in love with an idea, not a person. The fallout from Madison's departure wasn't just emotional. It was financial, too. I sat down with my lawyer, Mark, to go over the details of our divorce case. The good news was that the evidence we had, her journal, the financial records, and the photos Karen had collected, was ironclad. Madison's attempts to claim half of my assets were laughable in the face of her obvious infidelity and financial fraud. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on," Mark assured me. "With the documentation we've provided, the court isn't going to grant her a dime more than she's legally entitled to, and that's not much. The bad news was that Madison had already drained a significant portion of our joint savings. Even though I had frozen the accounts, she had done enough damage to leave me scrambling to recover. I sold the house. It was too big, too empty, and too full of memories I wanted to forget. I moved into a modest apartment downtown, trading luxury for simplicity. For the first time in years, I didn't care about appearances. I just wanted peace. Emotionally, I was a wreck. I threw myself into work, hoping it would distract me, but it only worked for so long. Every time I tried to focus on a project or attend a meeting, my mind drifted back to Madison. The anger and betrayal consumed me. I tried therapy, but even that was a struggle. You need to stop blaming yourself, my therapist, Dr. Holloway, said during one particularly rough session. You didn't cause this. Madison's actions are a reflection of her, not you. But I let it happen, I argued. I ignored the signs. I enabled her. How could I be so stupid? You weren't stupid, she said gently. You were trusting. And unfortunately, someone like Madison saw that as an opportunity. That doesn't mean you're at fault. It means you're human. I wanted to believe her, but it was hard. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a fool staring back at me. The worst moments were the quiet ones. Nights when I'd sit alone in my apartment, a drink in hand, and wonder how it all went so wrong. I'd replay every fight, every lie, every betrayal, trying to find some shred of meaning in the chaos. But there was no meaning. Madison had made her choices, and I was just collateral damage. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us on my phone. There we were at our wedding, smiling and holding hands, looking every bit the picture-perfect couple. There we were on vacation in Italy, sipping wine on a sunlit terrace. I stared at those images, trying to reconcile the woman in the photos with the one who had lied to my face and drained my bank account. It was like looking at two different people. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I deleted every photo, every text message, every email. I blocked her number, her social media accounts, and any mutual friends who might try to bring her back into my life. Madison was gone, and I was determined to keep it that way. As the weeks turned into months, the fog began to lift. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage to Madison. At first, it was awkward. How do you explain to someone that your wife was secretly a sugar baby? But to my surprise, most of them were supportive. Man, I'm so sorry you went through that, my friend Mike said over beers one night. But honestly, you dodged a bullet. Imagine if you'd had kids with her or something. She would have destroyed you. He was right, of course. As painful as the experience had been, I knew I had gotten out before things could get even worse. One night, as I was cleaning out some old files, I came across Madison's journal, the one Karen had found in her closet. I hadn't looked at it since the day I discovered it, but now, curiosity got the better of me. I flipped through the pages, reading the entries with a detached numbness. Most of it was what I remembered. Names, dates, payments, and notes about how to keep her clients happy. But then I found something that stopped me cold. It was an entry dated 2 months before our wedding. John's nice. A little boring, but stable. He's exactly what I need right now. Someone who'll pay the bills and keep things steady while I figure out my next move. If I play my cards right, he'll never know. I closed the journal and set it down, my hands trembling. There it was, in her own words. Proof that I had never been more than a means to an end. And yet, as painful as it was to read, it also brought a strange sense of closure. Madison hadn't changed. She had always been this way. The person I had fallen in love with was a fantasy, a role she had played to get what she wanted. The real Madison was a liar, a manipulator, and a stranger. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Madison was out of my life for good, and while the scars she left behind would take time to heal, I knew I'd come out stronger on the other side. With Madison out of my life, I thought the worst was behind me. But as I started to pick up the pieces, I realized there was still one loose end: justice. Madison hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had committed financial fraud, drained our accounts, and used my name to fund her double life. I couldn't let her walk away unscathed. The first step was going back to my lawyer, Mark. She's violated several laws here, Mark said as we reviewed the evidence again. Falsifying financial documents, misusing joint accounts, and if we dig deeper, there may be tax evasion in the mix. We can pursue this in civil court, but there's a chance it could turn criminal. The idea of taking Madison to court was daunting. I wanted to move on, not drag myself through more months or years of fighting. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that holding her accountable wasn't just about me. Madison's actions had affected others too. The men she had conned, the people she had lied to. If no one stood up to her, she'd just keep doing it. I want to move forward, I told Mark. Whatever it takes. The case against Madison began to take shape. Mark filed a civil lawsuit to recover the money she had stolen from our joint accounts. At the same time, we provided the evidence to law enforcement to investigate potential criminal charges. It turned out Madison's web of deceit was even more tangled than I had imagined. Karen, the private investigator, uncovered additional details about Madison's clients. Some of them had been giving her money under false pretenses, believing they were investing in legitimate business ventures. One man, a tech executive named Greg, had shelled out over $100,000 for what he thought was a stake in her non-existent fashion line. I thought she was the real deal, Greg told me during a phone call arranged by Karen. She had all the right answers, all the right connections. I didn't realize until it was too late that she was just taking my money and running. Greg agreed to testify if the case went to trial, and so did a few other men who had been duped by Madison's lies. Madison, of course, didn't take any of this lying down. I got a call from her one afternoon, her number popping up on my screen despite the fact that I had blocked it months ago. She must have used a different phone. "What the hell are you doing, John?" she snapped the moment I answered. "Getting justice," I said evenly. "You're ruining my life," she yelled. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to me? My reputation? My future?" Her words were dripping with indignation, as if she were the victim in all of this. "Your reputation?" I said, my voice cold. "You mean the reputation you built on lies? You brought this on yourself, Madison. All I'm doing is making sure you can't hurt anyone else." She tried to argue, to deflect, to guilt me into backing down. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. "This conversation is over," I said before hanging up. The lawsuit moved forward, and Madison's attempts to fight it were laughable. Mark tore apart her defense in court, presenting irrefutable evidence of her fraud and deception. She tried to claim that the money she took was a gift, that she had always been transparent about her intentions. But the journal, the bank statements, and the testimonies of her clients told a different story. By the time the trial was over, the judge ruled in my favor. Madison was ordered to repay the money she had stolen from me, as well as additional damages for emotional distress. But the victory didn't end there. The criminal investigation uncovered even more dirt on Madison. She had been evading taxes on the money she received from her clients, and the offshore accounts she had set up were a clear attempt to hide her earnings. When the case went to court, Madison's calm, polished facade finally cracked. She broke down on the stand, alternating between sobbing and lashing out at the prosecution. "I didn't have a choice," she cried at one point. "I did what I had to do to survive." But the jury wasn't buying it. After weeks of testimony and mountains of evidence, Madison was convicted of tax fraud and financial misconduct. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to her victims. Watching her be led out of the courtroom in handcuffs was surreal. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But another part of me felt hollow. This wasn't how I wanted my marriage to end. I had loved Madison once, or at least the version of her she had shown me. Seeing her reduced to this, a liar, a con artist, a broken shell of the woman I thought I knew, wasn't satisfying. It was just sad. After the trial, I sat down with Karen and Mark to wrap up the final details. "You did the right thing," Karen said, handing me the last of the documents. "Most people would have let her get away with it, but you stood your ground. That takes guts." "It doesn't feel like a victory," I admitted. "Because you're not like her," Mark said. "You have a conscience. That's why you won't let this define you." I nodded, grateful for their support. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, The weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. Madison's chapter in my life was officially over. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was still healing to do, still trust to rebuild. With myself, with others. But I also knew that I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. Justice had been served, and now it was time to move forward. But now came the hardest part. Rebuilding. I started small. My first step was going through what little I had brought from the house I sold. Boxes filled with keepsakes, documents, and odds and ends sat stacked in the corner of my living room, untouched since the move. As I sorted through them, I came across old photos of Madison and me, tucked away in an envelope I hadn't noticed before. I stared at them for a long time, trying to summon the anger I had felt for so long. But all I felt was emptiness. I didn't throw them out, though. Instead, I shoved them into the back of a drawer, where they couldn't haunt me but weren't erased entirely. A few weeks later, I decided to try something new. I signed up for a cooking class at a local community center, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. To my surprise, I actually enjoyed it. The act of creating something with my hands, of focusing on the process instead of the outcome, was unexpectedly therapeutic. It was in that class that I met Sophie. Sophie was nothing like Madison. She was kind, down to earth, and had a laugh that could light up a room. We ended up partnering for the class, and over the next few weeks, we got to know each other. When she asked about my past, I hesitated at first. But then I told her everything. The marriage, the lies, the divorce. I don't want to bring that baggage into something new, I said, my voice shaky. Sophie smiled softly. We all have baggage, John. The question is, are you carrying it, or is it carrying you? Her words stuck with me. Sophie and I took things slow. There were no grand gestures, no whirlwind romance. Just two people getting to know each other, one step at a time. It wasn't easy. There were moments when my insecurities flared up, when I found myself questioning her motives or doubting my own worth. But Sophie was patient, and with her support, and a lot of therapy, I started to heal. One evening, as we sat on my apartment balcony watching the sunset, Sophie turned to me and said, "You know, you're stronger than you think." "Why do you say that?" I asked. "Because you've been through hell," she said simply, "and you're still standing." For the first time, I believed her. One of the biggest lessons I took away from this ordeal was the importance of listening to my instincts. The red flags had been there from the start. Madison's constant need for attention, her vague answers about her career, the way she always seemed to deflect when I asked questions, none of it sat right with me. But I ignored my gut because I wanted to believe in the person I thought she was. That was my first mistake. Trust is essential in any relationship, but blind trust? That's a recipe for disaster. I learned the hard way that love doesn't mean ignoring your doubts. It means addressing them, having tough conversations, and being honest with yourself about what's really happening. As for Madison, I don't think about her much anymore. She served her prison sentence, and as far as I know, she's moved on to whatever comes next for her. I don't wish her ill, but I don't wish her well, either. She made her choices, and she's living with the consequences. The old me would have wanted closure, some grand apology or admission of guilt. But now, I realize that I don't need that. The only closure I need is the life I've built for myself. If there's one piece of advice I could give to anyone going through something similar, it's this: don't lose yourself. When someone betrays you, it's easy to let that betrayal define you, to see yourself as a victim, as someone who was fooled or broken. But you're more than that. You have the power to take back control, to rebuild, and to create a life that's even better than the one you lost. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But with time, patience, and the right support, you'll get there. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to Cheating Storytelling for more gripping real-life tales. Catch you in the next video.